welcome to the Kink Perspective. My name's Chris. I'm a psychotherapist and consultant. On today's show, I want to dig into a concept that runs underneath almost every kind of relationship we have, whether that's family dynamics, our romantic relationships, our professional life, and even part of the BDSM world. That concept is called agency. Now, most people think that they have it. They think because they're not being controlled that they're free. But having power or influence in a situation doesn't automatically mean you have agency. Power is actually often external. Agency is that internal part of ourselves. It's our ability to act, to decide, to speak up, or even walk away. Not because someone gave you permission, but because you're aligned with yourself. The deeper question here is this: are you living from a place, or are you just managing reactions and expectations or outcomes for everyone around you? And we're going to get into that today. Because the opposite of agency isn't just passivity, it's codependency. And that's when your choices, your voice, and even your identity become shaped entirely by what other people feel, what they need, or even expect. You're not making decisions anymore, you're responding to moods. And that can happen in a marriage, a family system, your workplace, or in a DS relationship. And often people don't even realize it's happening. Now, before I get started, I want to thank all of those who continue to show up, support the work that I do here, listen, all the questions and comments that you send to me. I truly appreciate it. If you haven't taken a moment, please follow, subscribe wherever you're listening, and rate the show 5 stars. It helps the show reach more people and grow, right? And if you'd like to support the show directly, there's a donation link inside the show's description. This show runs through listener support. There's no ads. I don't have sponsors, just these conversations. And they're kept independent and available because you all make it possible. So in today's episode, we're going to explore agency as a psychological and relational tool, how it works, where it disappears, and what it takes to reclaim it. We're going to look at how it plays out in our family systems, our romantic and sexual relationships, and especially in our power exchange and kink dynamics. So let's get into it. So first, what is agency? And what is it not? And let's start with something simple but often misunderstood. What agency actually is. Agency is your internal capacity to act from a place of self. It's the ability to make decisions, express boundaries, move towards what matters to you, or walk away from what doesn't, without needing someone else's approval or permission to do so. It's not just about reacting to situations, it's about responding in a way that aligns with who you are and what you value. That could mean taking the initiative, saying no, asking for something, or changing a direction when something no longer works. And it's not about being loud or dominant. Some of the strongest examples of agency are quiet. Someone choosing peace over conflict, truth over comfort, or honesty over people-pleasing. Where people get lost is that they think it, is what they think agency is, but it actually isn't. First, there's power. Now, power is external. It's about roles, control, access, and hierarchy. You can have formal power in a relationship, even at work or in our dynamics inside of the lifestyle, and still be completely disconnected from your own sense of self. You can be a dominant and still walking on eggshells to avoid emotional fallout. You can be the one making the rules but never asking yourself why you're following them. That's not agency. That's posturing. And on the other end, you can have no formal control at all and still hold incredible agency because you're grounded in what you know to be right for you. Then there's autonomy, which often gets tangled up with agency, but autonomy is about being able to act independently, standing alone, and needing no one. Now, while that sounds ideal for some people, it isn't always realistic or even healthy. You can be deeply interdependent with a partner, a group, or your community and still have full agency. You can be in a collar, in service, or in a long-term power exchange and still be acting from self. The key difference here is that you're choosing to stay, not stuck because you're afraid of what might happen if you leave. And finally, there's rebellion. Now, rebellion can be seductive because it feels powerful, but it's not agency. It's a reaction. If you're doing the opposite of what someone wants you to do just to prove a point, you're still letting them set the direction. And it's still about them. True agency isn't about reacting against, it's more so about choosing toward, if that makes sense. It's about stepping into your own lane with clarity, not just about walking away from somebody else's. So what shapes this ability in the first place? Well, that's a really good question, and we're going to explore that. Now, agency isn't just a personality trait. It's something shaped by experience. And for many people, especially those with trauma histories, early life didn't teach you how to act from yourself. It taught you how to adapt, how not to get in trouble, how to not make waves. If you grew up in a family where your needs were minimized, where disagreement was punished, or where adults made all the decisions without your input, chances are you didn't learn agency, you learned survival. And the more someone adapts instead of chooses, the more they lose touch with the feeling of self-direction altogether. That's where we start seeing learned helplessness. That's the experience of someone who has tried, maybe even for years, to advocate for themselves only to be ignored, maybe dismissed, or even punished for it. And eventually you stop trying. You decide that on some level that nothing will change and there's no point. And over time, that turns to identity. You start to believe you can't act, or that even acting won't make a difference anyways, right? So that's not laziness, that's conditioning. That's your nervous system doing its job. And if no one interrupts that process, no therapist, no partner, no moment of clarity, you just keep reenacting it in adulthood. And you stop choosing because choice doesn't even feel real anymore. You default, you drift. You manage everyone else's needs and call that stability, but it isn't. It's emotional captivity dressed up as balance. So I want to slow this down for a moment and ask you something. Are you living from agency, or are you just managing? Are you acting out of clarity, or are you just avoiding somebody else's reaction? Are your choices grounded in your values, or are you just afraid of what will happen if you say what you really think? So now, let's talk about the signs you've lost that agency. So how do you know if you're not living from agency? It's easy to assume that if you're making decisions, showing up for work, or even staying in that relationship, you're in control. But functioning isn't the same thing as choosing. You can go through all the motions and still be completely disconnected from yourself. You can follow the rules, meet your expectations, and keep everything afloat. But doing all of it from a place of survival and not self-direction. Right? So one of the first signs that agency is missing is that constant second guessing. You make a decision, you make a choice, then immediately you're questioning it. You say something, then you replay it 10 times in your head. You're not grounded in your choices, you're bracing for fallout. That's not clarity. That's anxiety that's running the show. When agency is present, you don't have to be perfect, but you trust your process. Without it, everything feels like a potential mistake. Then there's the conflict avoidance, especially at the cost of truth. If you constantly edit yourself to keep things calm or avoid speaking up because it's going to upset somebody, that's the red flag. It's not diplomacy, it's erasure. When you lose agency, you become more invested in someone else's comfort than your own integrity. And that might keep the peace in the short term, but it comes at the cost of your own voice and your identity. Another pattern that we're looking at here is waiting for permission instead of moving forward. Now, this can look really subtle. Maybe you keep checking in before you make a choice. Maybe you stay until somebody else gives the green light. Or maybe you're always asking what they think before you admit what you want. That's not collaboration, that's dependence. And it often comes from learned fear. If you've been punished in the past for acting independently, you might have internalized the belief that moving on your own will always end badly. Which then brings us up to something else, outsourcing your decisions to other people. If you're always looking to somebody else to tell you what to do, whether it's your friend, your dominant, a partner, a therapist, that's not support, that's a pattern, right? And this is actually one thing that comes up for me quite often in therapy. And my clients will ask me, well, what do I do? Well, I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm here to give you the ability to choose for yourself, to lay out one of many possibilities in front of you, but learning to decide that is what you need to do, right? And we have to think it's okay. We can seek insight, but it's a total other thing if you never trust yourself unless somebody else agrees. And over time, this wears down your internal compass. It diminishes your self-validation and your self-worth. You stop checking in on yourself entirely. You also start living in reaction mode. This is when you're constantly defending, justifying, or even explaining yourself. You're not acting, you're managing, right? And managing somebody else's expectations, if you're managing their moods or even their reactions to your boundaries, you start to feel like it's your job to stay ahead of disappointment or rejection. And the more you live in that space, the less access you have to your own wants, limits, or direction. And this shows up in our lifestyle too, very clearly. A lot of people default to the dynamic. They let the rules run the relationship. And don't get me wrong, structure can be beautiful, especially when it's co-created. But when someone submits without question, when they stop negotiating or expressing or even checking in with themselves, that's not submission, that's self-abandonment. And for you dominants listening, this matters just as much. If you're hiding behind protocol instead of actually leading, or you're using power to avoid emotional responsibility, that's not agency either. That's deflection in a role. Agency in kink isn't about who's on top. It's about whether the choices you're making are conscious, communicative, and mutual. And too often people confuse playing a role with being okay. You can follow a rule and stick to a dynamic and fulfill your duty and still be out of alignment with yourself. And here's a deeper layer to all of this. When agency erodes, it doesn't always look like collapse, which I recently talked about as well. It often looks like overfunctioning. You keep the house together, you show up for work, you serve your partner, you stay in control, but inside there's zero movement. There's no freedom. You're operating from obligation and anticipation, not choice. And the more you stay in that space, the more your capacity to decide, and I mean really decide, shrinks. You stop trusting yourself. You even stop asking what you want. That's not low confidence. That's the erosion of the part of you that's supposed to be steer and clear and keep you moving in the direction that's healthy for you. So rebuilding agency starts by recognizing that it's gone quiet. Not failed, not disappeared, but just quiet. And that silence to you is a signal. It's asking you to come back to yourself, even if it starts small. We're going to look at erosion here and how it disappears in the first place, because no one wakes up one day and forgets how to choose. It's something that happens over time, and it usually starts in places you were never given the freedom to begin with. So, what are the psychological roots of collapsing agency? And how does this actually happen? What leads someone to lose touch with their agency in the first place? Now, it usually doesn't start in adulthood. It starts in systems you were raised in, systems that shaped you for, what you came to believe about as far as emotion, responsibility, safety, and choice. Now, if no one ever taught you what it meant to act for himself, you probably learned to adapt instead. So let's start with our family systems. In a lot of households, especially rigid or chaotic ones, the child doesn't get to choose. Decisions are made for them. Emotions are managed or even punished. Now, you might have been told to stop crying or calm down before you ever learned how to feel. Or maybe you had a parent who expected you to adjust your needs to fit theirs, never the other way around. And in those environments, agency isn't molded or modeled. It's suppressed. You don't learn how to own your choices. You learned how to behave, you learned how to keep the peace, and most of all, you learned to stay invisible. Then there's the emotional enmeshment here, which is different but just as damaging. This is when your emotional world becomes fused with somebody else's. Your worth gets tied to how well you keep another person regulated. You're not allowed to have your own internal experience because it's going to probably upset them. And this often happens with a parent who leans on their child for emotional support or makes the child responsible for their moods. So what happens? You learn to scan the room before you even speak. You read their face before you make a choice. And then you abandon yourself, not because you're weak, but because that's how love was earned. And that kind of early training doesn't just go away, it becomes the model. And that's where repetition compulsion comes in. Now, that's a clinical term, but The concept is really simple. We recreate what's familiar even when it hurts. And you end up in relationships where you're once again giving everything just to feel safe. You silence yourself to preserve connection. And then you trade agency for attachment. And it feels normal because that's what closeness looked like when you were young. However, now, instead of saying what you need, you shrink. And then you manage. And then you hope someone's going to notice that without you having to say anything. And gender roles and culture play a massive part in this as well. From an early age, a lot of people, especially women and those raised in more submissive frameworks, are taught that their value comes from compliance, from being easy to work with, not from making a scene or, from being desirable, agreeable, and low maintenance. The conditioning is absolutely everywhere. Be polite, be modest, be understanding. Don't be, quote unquote, difficult. And even in kink spaces, this can carry over. Submissives in particular are often praised for obedience, but rarely asked if they want to obey. And when they're not encouraged to speak up or challenge power dynamics, silence becomes a habit, not a choice. But it's not just about one side of the slash. Now, for men, and especially those raised in the traditional masculine norms, the conditioning doesn't say comply, it says perform, lead, provide, and definitely don't feel too much, don't falter. Many dominants are socialized into a role where they have to hold it together all the time. They're expected to know, to decide, and to control, and there's often no space to pause, to question, or to even be vulnerable without feeling like they're failing the dynamic. Now that leads to a different kind of agency loss, a form that hides behind authority and competence, but still lacks true choice. Because if your identity is based on never showing doubt, you're not free either. So whether you were raised to disappear or raised to perform, the result is still the same. Agency collapses anytime you expected to fulfill a role at the cost of your humanity. And it doesn't matter if you're a submissive or a dominant, you're a femme or you're a mask, quiet or you're assertive. If you're operating from expectation instead of inner alignment, agency is eroded. And all of this, family conditioning, enmeshment, repetition, cultural roles, leads to one thing, the collapse of self in service of the system. And that's exactly what codependency is at its core. It's not just about being too nice or losing yourself inside of the relationship. It's about forming your identity around somebody else's comfort, their needs, and their approval. And it's about avoiding abandonment at any cost. And it's about absorbing other people's pain so they don't have to feel it. You become that buffer. And over time, you forget what you actually want, or if you're even allowed to want anything at all. And this is how agency collapses, not in one dramatic moment, but in a small repeated acts of self-abandonment that get normalized. And if no one interrupts that pattern, you keep reliving it. You keep calling it love or duty, maybe even strength. But what it really is absence. An absence of choice, of freedom, an absence of that inner voice that says, I don't really want this, or this doesn't work for me anymore. This absolutely needs to change. Reclaiming agency means confronting where it was never allowed to grow. It means asking hard questions about the systems you came from and whether those systems taught you to choose or to serve, right? So let's now talk about reclaiming agency inside of our relationships. So, once you've recognized that your agency has collapsed or even gone quiet, what do you actually do about it? Now, this is where a lot of people get stuck. Because agency doesn't come from flipping a switch, it comes from learning to trust yourself again. And trust doesn't grow from thinking differently. It grows from actually behaving differently, for showing up for yourself repeatedly, that you can make choices and actually hold on to them, even if it feels uncomfortable. Especially then, you have to start by asking yourself a really hard question. Where am I compromising out of fear and not love? Where am I staying quiet, not because it feels good or right, but because I'm afraid of what might happen if I speak? And where am I saying yes just to avoid conflict? And where am I adjusting to be tolerated instead of choosing to be honest? These questions really do matter because the way we get back to agency isn't loud. It doesn't begin with some sort of dramatic life overhaul. It usually starts with the small, quiet moments. You tell the truth even when it's easier to lie. You hold one boundary instead of softening out of guilt. And you tolerate someone's discomfort without shrinking. One truth, one no, one unmet expectation, and you hold firm. And the more you do that consistently, the more your internal system starts to recalibrate. You stop looking outward for cues and you start feeling inward for clarity. And that's what builds self-trust, not affirmation, not external approval, but action. It's about doing the thing you said you would do, even if no one's watching. It's not seeking permission for every step that you're going to take. It's listening to your own values and letting them guide the way forward, even when other people don't agree. And when you do that, you begin to remember that your life is yours to live, not something to be constantly negotiated with everyone around you. Now, this applies just as much, if not even more, to the lifestyle. So let's talk about submission, because this is where agency is often misunderstood. Submission isn't passivity. It's not about disappearing. It's not about silence. Real submission, when it's healthy and conscious, is rooted in agency. It's chosen. It's negotiated. It's something you step into because it aligns with who you are, not because you're afraid to speak or afraid to disrupt. And if you're submitting because it keeps things stable or because you think that's what's expected of you, that's not ownership. That's survival mode compliance. Submission should always be active, not automatic. And that means the work of the submissive isn't just about following rules. It's about being in tune with yourself enough to know when something no longer fits. That includes speaking up, renegotiating, or even stepping back when something crosses your internal line. Submission without a voice isn't devotion, it's self-erasure. And I've talked about this quite often. And this is why negotiation matters. It's not just about a one-time event, but as a living practice. Negotiation is how agency breathes inside of a dynamic. It's not about proving loyalty. It's about staying connected to yourself while still offering yourself in consensual exchange. But I want to talk about the other side of that, dominance. Because here too, the idea of agency often gets lost. Dominance isn't leadership if it only works through control. If your authority relies on someone else never pushing back or never adjusting or never even voicing their discomfort, that's not strength, that's fragility, right? Real dominance makes space for autonomy. It welcomes clarity. It values a submissive's voice because that voice is part of the structure, not a threat to it. And you don't build agency by avoiding challenge. You build it by staying in it with integrity when the challenge comes. And that's true for both sides of the slash. The healthiest dynamics I've ever seen aren't the ones where everyone's perfectly obedient and perfectly in charge. They're the ones where both people are acting from ownership, not obligation. And you show up because you want to, not because you're afraid to, what's going to happen if you don't. And this applies to many relationships outside of the lifestyle. Romantic relationships, in friendships, at work, in family. When agency is present, people don't just do what's expected. They act they act in alignment with who they are. They negotiate not to win, but to stay connected without disappearing. They challenge without dominating. They compromise without self-erasing. They stay rooted in themselves without needing to overpower anyone else. So if you're asking yourself how to rebuild agency, don't start with confidence. Start with clarity. Then back it with your action. Small, consistent acts of alignment are how agency returns, not when everything feels safe, but when you do it anyway. And I want to give you a personal example here. A very long time ago, I made a decision inside of my family that no longer aligned with what I wanted in my life. Now, I could have shrank because in the family that I was raised in, that culture, and where it's rooted from with European values, I could have easily have just lost myself, stayed and did something I wouldn't have been happy for, and that would have been a huge sacrifice in my life. I didn't do it. I had to make a choice. But that choice wasn't based on what they wanted. It was based on what I wanted. And I didn't shrink to it. They didn't like it, but I don't have to sit with their discomfort, and I didn't. And they had to sit with what my choice was, whether they liked it or not. And then we carried forward. It's not always easy to do. And it did. In this example here with my personal life, it took me 40 years to get there. because I realized I was no longer me just by submitting to the needs of what my family wanted, right? So I learned myself, and I learned how to stand up. And I learned that even if they were disappointed, that it wasn't going to affect my life, because I didn't lead and I don't lead my life for anyone but me, right? So let's talk about living with agency even when it costs you. And here's the part that no one really tells you when you start reclaiming it. It's going to cost you something, like I told you. And in my example, it cost me part of my family, right? It might cost you the comfort of that routine. It might cost you certain relationships. It might shake the ground underneath the life you carefully managed up until this point. But your life has been built around keeping other people comfortable at the expense of your own integrity. So that's not a life. That's a strategy. And strategies are not meant to last forever. Living with agency doesn't mean you always feel powerful. It doesn't mean you dominate every room you walk into, or that your choices won't affect others. It means you know what's exactly yours to carry and what isn't. It means you stop outsourcing your decisions to fear or guilt or habit. And you stop waiting for someone else to give you permission to want what you want and live how you need to live. And that was exactly what happened to me. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Once you start doing that, there's going to be a lot of people who won't like it. Parts of my family didn't like it. Some people only know how to relate when you stay small, maybe even agreeable or even quiet. They were used to that version of you that bent to keep the peace. The moment you start telling the truth, you start saying no, or you are asking for more, things begin to shift. And that can feel like betrayal to those who were benefiting from your silence. And absolutely, it can feel terrifying, especially if you spent years, decades, anchoring your identity in being needed or being liked or being easy to handle. But this is where this difference between agency and control matters. You don't reclaim your agency by trying to control everybody else's reaction to your truth. That's not your job, and that's never been your job. You reclaim agency by being responsible for your own choices fully and without apology. Responsibility is not the same thing as blame. And it's not about fault, it's about ownership. And it's being able to say, this is who I am, this is what I value, and this is what I will and I won't allow in my life. And that clarity isn't cruel, it's clean. And to be honest, it's very rare. And most people don't live their lives reacting to others or managing or adjusting or contorting, because honestly, doing all of that feels safer than standing still and letting the chips fall where they may. But you can't keep building a version of yourself around what other people need from you. You're going to burn out. And then you start to resent them, and then you lose track of your own instincts. Agency is what brings you back to the center, right? It's not about becoming selfish. It's about becoming honest. And there's this popular idea that having boundaries or walking away from toxic, dynamics makes you cold or harsh. But real agency isn't about pushing people away. It's about showing up as someone who is self-led. Someone who can be present, vulnerable, and kind, but without erasing themselves just to keep a connection. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to be clear about what you won't keep participating in. And that's not abandonment. That's alignment. Living with agency also means accepting that you won't get it, right every time. You're going to overcorrect. You're going to doubt yourself. And sometimes you might even speak too soon. Other times you're going to stay quiet for maybe too long. That's not failure. That's the recalibration process. You're rebuilding muscles that may have been ignored or even discouraged for most of your life. And it's not clean work, but to be honest with you, it's very centered in who you are. And if you're in a dynamic, whether that's romantic, sexual, professional, or even family, where your agency is constantly and consistently minimized or ignored, that's the information. That's not a call to immediately end things, but it is a call to start paying attention. Can this relationship hold your voice? Does it hold my needs and my limits? And if not, can it grow to? And if not, what's going to be the cost to myself if I stay in it? So as we kind of move through this, right, I want to leave you with this question, not as a challenge, but as a checkpoint. Are you living your life, or are you just managing somebody else's? That's what agency really asks you to confront. It asks you to stop living on autopilot, to stop playing roles that were handed to you before you even knew you had a choice, to stop confusing peacekeeping with love and compliance with loyalty. Because at the end of the day, agency isn't about what you control, it's about what you choose, even when it's hard, even when it changes things, even when people don't like it. It's the only way to build a life that actually belongs to you. So much of what I've talked about today comes down to this. Agency is not about what others let you do, it's about how you live. It's about how you show up. It's about the clarity that you get to decide who you are, what you'll stand for, and how you're going to respond, even when it's inconvenient, uncomfortable, or unfamiliar. Agency doesn't wait for permission. It moves from alignment, not with expectations and not with roles, but with self. So you're not here just to manage other people's reactions. You're not here to stay small so other people stay calm. And you're definitely not here to live on default. You are here to shape your life, to make decisions that only you can make. And that doesn't mean you won't lose people, but it does mean you're going to stop losing yourself. So as I'm bringing this to a close today, I want to leave you with a question that I want you all to think about. Not to fix anything, but I want you to sit with it. What would you do differently if you fully believed your life was yours? Right? And it seems like a really simple question, but the longer you sit with it, the more that's going to expand for you. Right? This show has never been about answers. It's always been about equipping you to ask better questions of yourself, and ones that definitely cut through the noise and help you move with more intention and more clarity and more truth. Now, I do want to talk about a couple of quick things here at the end before I get to what's coming up and some releases and some things I'm going to be doing. Number one, my AMA. I am very happy overall with the questions and some of the things you're asking. Absolutely love answering them to the best of my ability. Sometimes there's questions that are asked. They're not in my wheelhouse, and unfortunately, if your question doesn't get answered, it's more unlikely. I don't deal with neurodivergence. Right? I don't work with the autism spectrum because that's just a different skill set, and that's not something I specialized in. So for the most part, love the questions. But if you do ask me questions that are therapeutically fishing, and that's been happening a little bit more lately, or you're talking to me about some sort of emotional or psychological collapse, I can't actually answer these questions. And frankly, I'm not going to. First, that's my job, and that's what I get paid to do. And that payment sponsors this show. Everything I do pays for everything else that I do. So if you ask me those questions, I'm just going to, unfortunately, I have to ignore them. So just keep that in mind. Number two, please stop asking me personal questions. What kind of car do I drive? My favorite meals, clothes I wear. I have a right to my private life, and I'm not going to go into why, but I'm a very private person. I was on another podcast recently. You can go and find that. I was on Authentically Kinky, and I said it there. Although I do open up a little bit about my life, I need a separation from what I do professionally to what I do privately. And if I give all of that, and there are people in this world that like to, it's not about their work, it's about them. I am the opposite. This is about my work, and I want to get this out there, and I want to help people. But if I make this about me, right, and I'm not talking about when I give you an anecdote, but if I make the work about me, then it's no longer about the work, okay? So I'm not going to answer those questions either. So I'm just trying to be clear on this, and, maybe this quells it because I even got a question. I got an email about it today, and I'm just not going to respond. Now, let me move to some other things. It has been a while, but I'm going to be doing, in the next couple of months, I'm going to put out a couple of more worksheets for the community. Now, I do these free of charge. They are downloadable on my website. If you go to my website, you can go into the downloads or the resources section, click on there, go into the downloads, and there's I think 6 or 7 different worksheets at this point. They're all for free. Use them in your communities. Use them when you're negotiating your dynamics. Use them to check in with yourselves, whatever you need them for. They are there free of charge, right? So I'm going to do a couple more here in the coming months. I still need to sit down with Red Warrior. My apologies to her. I keep meaning to bring her on, but it is a big conflict, and it's a lot more for me than it is for her. because I work. Second, I am going to be bringing on Hi There Catsuit. This is the gentleman who runs the Authentically Kinky podcast, but I want to bring him on, talk to him about his side, the things that he's into, and the whys behind it, because I think it's going to be powerful. I am going to get to the other show about the Middle East. I am in coordinating right now. That's just a time zone difference. It's going to happen, right? I'm very fascinated, and the rest of the kink community should be fascinated by, if we talk about inclusivity in kink, and we are talking about the differences and how this all unites us, that should be a show you all want to get behind, right? So I have all those things in development. A couple of other things. Yes, I do have a book, Tangled Desires, The Intersection Between Psychology and BDSM. You can get this wherever you download ebooks, or there is a print version. It's very inexpensive. It's my first book. I'm going to tell you now, I'll be the first critic of it. It's a little repetitive, and I've heard that before, but there's some genuine insights, and it's the first thing I ever wrote. So if you get it, leave a review, remind yourself, hey, you know what? This first book this person wrote, right? Let's give Chris a little bit of a break, right? I know it's not a bestseller, not intended to be, right? Just give me a little bit of a break, right? And right now I am trying to keep my show for free, but please understand, and I get this question a lot as well, I take hours to come up with a topic, to write my script, to do my show, to do the editing, to do all the post and the pre-stuff. So I'm very happy when you ask me or give me questions for shows, but if you demand something of my time, please understand that that costs me money. Now, I have never once asked anybody, demanded, or made some of my shows subscription based only, and I'm trying not to do that. But please keep in mind, if you do want these things, you know what? It's not to be, I don't think it's full of myself to ask, you know what? There is a little bit of donation. Like, if you want to chuck me $5, that's very helpful, because it goes towards my time. This stuff takes me a lot of time to research and look into to bring to you all, right? I've now got almost 6,000 followers on my show. That's a lot, and I want to help. You really have no idea how much I really want to do this for you all. But it does take a lot of my time. So a little less on the demands, more at least on suggestions. And you know what? If you can help me out, that's great. If not, then I'll get to them when I can. So please just be patient with me. I am listening. I do respond. And if you follow me on social media, you'll notice for the most part, I respond to almost every comment. And if you've ever emailed me, you'll definitely know I respond to every email, right? So anyway, that's a little bit about, I had to get that out there because it's kind of been sitting inside of me, and I'm it's not a frustration point, but my time is valuable, and I want to make sure that I'm still respected for what I do, right? And I know a lot of you, and I'm not saying you don't respect me for what I do. There are people that may hear this that need to hear that part. Anyway, I want to know what your thoughts on agency are. Do you live with it? Have you experienced it? Have you come into your agency? And what's that transformation been like for you? Let me know in the thoughts and comments below, wherever you listen. Please rate the show, follow it. So rate it 5 stars on Spotify. You need to have the app for that. Like and subscribe on YouTube or Apple or wherever you got your, you get your podcasts or you listen to me from, right? That way, other people who do need to hear this, even share the show, share links with them on anything they need to hear, and maybe one of these shows is going to help them find themselves. Until next time, everybody, be safe and stay kink.